Oh, I should have erased this before I started. So I want to finish, again, the material here. Finish the material with a discussion about risk. Some principles about risk and dealing with risk. First is, we can't or don't live in a zero-risk world. We don't. That's just, the world is an uncertain place, as we are currently experiencing. 3 months ago, I did not think that we would be meeting virtually and that I would be recording videos. I thought that eventually I would be forced to teach online, that it would probably be next year or years in the future, and that I'd be able to hold off without teaching online for a little while longer. I was wrong. So there was some risk there. So we can't live in a zero-cost or in a zero-risk world. There's also an opportunity cost to reduce risk. So as we're discovering, we're engaged in this trade-off. How risky should we be? Should I go for a run? Should I ever leave my apartment until this is over? Should I order takeout food? If I do order takeout food, should I try and sanitize the entire outside of the package? Should I make sure that all the food I have I can stick in the microwave for 30 seconds? Apparently that is a reasonable length of time to kill off the virus. Stick it in the microwave for 30 seconds. But the key here is that there's an opportunity cost to reducing risk. Either the opportunity cost of giving up things that we could be doing, meeting with friends and family, meeting in person, or other time and energy for sanitizing the containers. We don't live in a zero-cost world, and that there's an opportunity cost to reducing risk. Third is that people have different preferences for risk. Some people are more willing to take more risk. I ride a motorcycle. It's riskier than a car. I'm more likely to get in a fatal accident on a motorcycle than a fatal accident in a car. Does that mean I'm foolish? Well, maybe. It also might mean that I have a slightly different risk preference. We can talk about discounted present value and time preference, although I think in this class we'll set that to one side, and for those of you who take macro with me, we will return to that. So, turns out that what we probably would want to do is allow people to contract for risk. Assuming that that risk, this is currently the issue, this area where we are struggling currently, is that car accidents and COVID cases are very different. If I get in a car accident and I take on the risk of driving recklessly, or if I get in a motorcycle accident, which I've done, I've wrecked at least one of my motorcycles. It wasn't my fault, I tell you. Well, the police agreed. But if I get in a motorcycle accident, that might mean that one other person in another car gets hurt. But that motorcycle accident isn't going to spread to other people. And so one of the things that we probably would want to do is have a situation where liability, in other words, ownership of the damage, rests on the person who can prevent mistakes and generate information the most easily. That's a general principle. Now, there's some cases, like in the current one, where we have a case of contagion, where we say, look, we are simply going to tell people that them taking this risk, you want to think about this, the current situation is a nice example of the fact that individuals choose according to their expected marginal benefit and their expected marginal cost. The benefit of going out and doing things, going to work, meeting friends, all of that, the person making that decision gets all of the benefit. However, the downside of that, the harm, yeah, they're going to possibly spend some time getting sick. But again, if they have the virus, they are going to also get other people sick. And so they are only going to bear part of the cost, not all of the cost. And so what we would want to do is find some way to cause the private marginal cost to align with the private marginal benefit. If we don't, we would expect too many people wandering around outside, getting everybody else sick. And this, to a large extent, is what happened in Italy, and this is what measures are currently designed to address. So this is a fundamentally different situation. This is not an argument that restrictions on movement in the present are a bad thing. I think there's some good reasons why we would expect the current situation to be different. In other words, there's a greater argument for government intervention or in attempts to align the private and collective costs and benefits. But in the typical world where we're not talking about contagion, what we probably would want is we'd want to be able to contract for risk, and we'd want a world where liability rests on those who can prevent mistakes and generate information the most easily. So if you think about cases like this, where would we want liability to rest? Would we want the liability if kids get into medicine and get sick because they have taken their parents' or somebody else's medicine? Who would we want liable for that? In other words, who is the least cost avoider of the harm? Is it the pharmaceutical companies or is it the parents? I'm pretty sure it's the parents. I'm pretty sure the parents are the ones who can, at the lowest cost, figure out what the optimal amount of risk is. Now, again, there might be some irresponsible parents that we would need to pay attention to, and we might want some social service intervention at that point. Or turns out that now in most jurisdictions it's very difficult to buy a lawnmower that doesn't have an automatic shutoff. You know, the ones where you let go and the engine kicks out. Why would we have that? It seems like it would make sense that that is an option. But I don't see too many lawnmowers without it anymore. And a large part of the reason is because some people, there are legal cases of this, took their lawnmower and they tried cutting their hedges with it, right? They tried, whoa, this will be great. And then, of course, they dropped the lawnmower and you got this lawnmower bouncing around with this blade spinning around, and they sued, and the court said, yeah, you know what? The companies that make this have an obligation to ensure that you don't get hurt when using the lawnmower, even when you're using it to trim your hedges. Okay? So, of course, what did that do to the incentive of people to be careful when they're mowing their lawns? It decreased their incentive, probably increased the number of accidents, but also means we have spent a fair bit of time, energy, and money designing safety devices that people would prefer are not on there. I don't know about you, but when I go mow the lawn at my parents', when I visit them, they have a lawnmower with the automatic shutoff. Guess what? We got a piece of baling wire wrapped around that, keeping it on all the time. There's a lot of examples with this. Turns out the United States system, we're getting into law and economics analysis, which we, again, could take the tools of economics out and see what they tell us about the law. But it turns out we probably wouldn't want compensation for damage unless there is a claim about negligence. In other words, unless you can make a claim that the company did not follow through on what they said they would do. Because the result of that is it makes a lot of things more complicated and more expensive. It also turns out in many cases we've contracted away the risk ability. In many jurisdictions, cannot sign away my risk. And it turns out, if we think about it, what's the optimal number of traffic fatalities? It's not zero. What's the optimal number of terrorist attacks using planes? I know how to stop all terrorist attacks using planes. I do. How would we do that? Well, we could ban all planes. Planes could never take off. We